and welcome everyone. Today, the webcast is entitled Supply Chain Resiliency Leadership Series, Multi-Tier Mapping and Assessment. I'm your host for today, John Bovitz, Chief Marketing Officer of Resilinc. This webcast is one of a series we are hosting on various supply chain resiliency and risk mitigation topics. We hope you enjoy it. On today's webcast, we have three speakers plus myself, Craig Fix, Bindia Vakil, and Kevin O'Loughlin. Craig Fix is the Corporate Director of Global Procurement and Sourcing at DENTSPLY Corporation. Bindia is the founder and CEO of Resilinc, and Kevin O'Loughlin is the Managing Partner, Supply Chain and Advisory Services at KPMG. All the speakers are thought leaders and practitioners, so I think you'll enjoy the webcast today we have planned. As Connie mentioned, if you have any questions for the speakers at the end of the webcast, please use the Q&A feature or even the chat feature. Send them to myself, John Bovitz, the host, and I'll take those questions and we'll field the ones that we can at the end. At the end, the slides will be made available after the webcast is over. For the agenda today, after a brief introduction, Craig will kick things off with a discussion on DENTSPLY's experience and lessons learned during their supply chain risk and resiliency project. Always exciting to hear about lessons learned from direct recent experience. I think you'll like that. From Craig, we will turn it over to Kevin to discuss a viewpoint that is cross-customer and cross-industries. I think you'll find that KPMG has a unique perspective on approaching enterprise-wide supply chain risk programs. And after Kevin, Bindia will discuss common questions we get asked, such as what is the business justification for creating a holistic supply chain resiliency program? And then we'll wrap it up with a Q&A before closing today. So years of globalization, lean adoption, and extensive outsourcing have resulted in complex and fragile supply chains and increased demand supply volatility. This has resulted in C-level executives and board of directors now taking a hard look at supply chain risk after natural disasters and external environmental events between 2008 and 2012 put a spotlight on global supply chain vulnerabilities. As well, demanding customers are requiring supplier partners to provide better and continuous visibility to multi-tier dependencies, consistent delivery, and overall service level efficiencies. And executives are accountable for response to disruptions, looking to rapidly adopt to this business landscape in a repeatable, economical, and scalable function. We've seen numerous examples of companies being impacted by supply chain risks, including profits being impacted, revenue being impacted, and overall brands being impacted for that matter. Here are a few examples. I'm sure you've seen them recently. In March of 2012, an explosion at a single plant, Evonik Industries in West Germany, killed 2 workers and damaged a factory. The plant made CDT, a chemical that is a key component in a nylon resin called PA12, which is used to make specialized plastics used in auto, fuel, and brake systems, as well as other applications. The potential shortage of resin threatened to shut down factories and had an impact on cost and profit as people needed to grab inventory and prices went up. Of course, most people heard about the Thailand floods that had such a huge impact on the high-tech and automotive industries, among others. And more recently, Walmart has adopted a, quote, zero-tolerance policy towards suppliers following a deadly fire at a Bangladesh factory that made garments for the company. This fire, which killed 112 workers and caused an impact to the Walmart brand, even though the factory wasn't authorized to make its clothes. The factory was used by subcontractors, and thus Walmart was unaware of the risk. They have since made changes in order to better manage similar future risks, but it's still a valuable lesson for us all. And now I'd like to turn it over to Craig Fix from DENTSPLY to discuss his experiences.
Thank you, John. First of all, it's a pleasure for me to join the Resilinc team here this afternoon and to share a little bit about our early status towards our journey of our vision towards zero lost revenue or expenses due to supply source disruptions. Just a little bit about myself here and my role. I'm responsible for the global procurement and sourcing, overseeing DENTSPLY's direct material, indirect material and services, as well as CapEx. So it's well over $1 billion in spend that we have to look over around our 33 different factories. I recently joined DENTSPLY about 2 years ago, coming from the high-tech industry of companies like Hewlett-Packard, Agilent Technologies, and Laird Technologies. In fact, before the teleconference this afternoon, I was talking to John a little bit about the anniversary date of this conference, which is about almost 2 years to the day that I was sitting in a war room trying to figure out what the impact to our supply chain was due to the Japan tsunami and earthquake. So if you want to go to the next page, John. DENTSPLY International is a $3 billion global dental company, dental components and consumables company. We don't produce any equipment, but we produce all of the components and consumable items that go into a dentist or a laboratory that is providing implant devices and systems, endodontic devices, prosthetic devices, orthodontics, and also kind of preventive and restorative kind of products that are related to caring for your teeth. So basically, we have a lot of raw material and lower level components that go into the products that we manufacture and assemble all over the world. We're composed of 6 major business groups having 33 factory locations, mostly in North America and Europe, but also in Brazil, Japan, and China. We have, as a result of these 33 different factories, thousands of suppliers supporting all of the different kind of products that we build, and a lot of acquisitions that is related to DENTSPLY's growth. In fact, we had, since 2000, I would say 80% of the acquisitions that we made were in the last 10 or 12 years. And so what came out of that huge explosion of acquisitions was a lot of different small companies having relatively shallow expertise or attention to advanced sourcing and supply chain management. And as we've grown as a company, we've become more serious about making sure that we can properly integrate and manage across all these different divisions and business groups in the supply chain. So, John, if you want to go to the next one. DENTSPLY, at least during my time, we've seen quite a few disruptions and fire drills. And prior to that, DENTSPLY had a number of situations where we had disruptions, but a lot of times these events were handled. We reacted to them, we handled them, and then tried to get to them as soon as we could. But during 2012, the tsunami and the earthquake was a huge wake-up call for us. We had our single source supplier for our orthodontic bracket components 3 kilometers from the Fukushima reactor. And so when the tsunami hit, everybody knows the story on that. We basically lost our only supplier, and we had a $200 million revenue impact over 1 year just due to that earthquake, just on one supplier. And that was the impact to the business. That was a huge wake-up call. And in addition to that, we had a lot of sub-tier 1 suppliers that were in Japan that we didn't even know about that we're delivering to other parts of our supply chain that were Tier 1. And so we were really scrambling to hunt down who are these Tier 2, who are these Tier 3 suppliers to find out whether or not we were exposed so that we could grab that material as soon as possible. So that was a huge wake-up call to our management team. We're still recovering. That orthodontics business is still in the process of steadily but slowly recovering from the earthquake. Last year, we were affected by the Avonic fire and explosion. In fact, this was a situation where we had one of our factories didn't even know they were affected by this supplier, even though we had a relationship with Avonic. They just didn't know the connection between their part and that particular factory. Earlier this year, or earlier in 2012, we also had a lot of Middle East tensions. We have a number of critical sole source suppliers in the Middle East. And as a result of this kind of scare, we quickly spent a lot of money bringing in inventory to protect ourselves from that situation. And again, this is kind of the typical situation that we used to respond to in this fashion was if we were afraid that there was a risk, we would throw a lot of dollars into inventory to mitigate it. And everybody, our senior management, recognizes the need to be more strategic and effective with our cash management and to make the right investments in order to position inventory where we need to in the supply chain and based on where the type of risk that we have. And we've got a lot of them. We've got kinds of natural disaster or terror type risks. Those are things that we can't control, but we need to try to anticipate. And then we've got issues that we need to try to understand and be prepared for, like capacity or shortages, process issues that might be lurking in the supplier's process. John, if you want to keep going ahead. So some of our challenges, that as we looked at the DENTSPLY supply chain, some of the things that were common to all of our divisions is that we have a lot of single sources or sole sources of supply. They're very significant and they affect well over 50% of our direct material. A lot of this is driven by the fact that we have unique designs or specifications. In some cases, we might want to source from a large corporation, but the specialized ingredient that we need is relatively small and insignificant to them. The other thing that really makes it difficult for us or challenging is that due to this, if we have an interruption, if we have to react, it could take easily 18 months to find another source, qualify it, and validate it according to the FDA requirements. That's just a huge impact on our revenue, if we have to get into that situation. Also, a lot of our divisions cross-sell to each other. So not only does the division that is providing the material to its end customer, if they're affected, but also a lot of other divisions downstream that are integrating those components into kits or their kind of products are also affected. We have a very complex organization chart, so trying to work across all these different divisions and locations. We have many suppliers that supply to multiple divisions that we didn't know existed based on the acquisitions. And as we dove deeper into the supply chain, looking across the vintage chart that we had, we found that there were a lot of suppliers that were selling to the same or different divisions that the other division didn't know about. So, one supplier can not only hurt one division, but they can hurt multiple divisions at the same time, depending on the type of the problem. The other thing is that our culture historically has been has a posture of kind of reacting to risk, supply risk, instead of mitigating it up front. Our supply chain has, when we looked at supplier risk in the past, it was pretty much a quality or regulatory kind of perspective, which is more process-based and more process control-based as opposed to supplier tier 1 and sub-tier supplier type of exposure and risk. And so that was because we just didn't have transparency beyond the tier 1. And so a lot of our issues were reactionary. We didn't have tools to quantify risk. And so if you couldn't quantify the risk, it was very difficult to work with the R&D teams and quantify the value of trying to dual source another supplier when doing that would cost additional R&D time and or expense dollars. The other thing in terms of R&D is we just didn't have a way to value that, and we didn't have a system or people to try to drive that system upstream. And also, finally, our business continuity plans with our suppliers that were less than $200 million. We have actually a number of suppliers who are less than $200 million. And those suppliers are really not having, many of them don't have sophisticated or strategic supply chain management methods and tools. And so all of these factors kind of stack up to make managing risk in our supply chain a big challenge. As we started on this journey after the tsunami, it was really a wake-up call, and our COO and our CEO really felt like, look, you've got to figure this out. You've got to solve this. We need to solve this. It's very important. It was important to the board. And so we started working on this back in, I would say, middle of 2011 to try to characterize and understand our situation. We looked around and we looked at basically three kind of options. One is we could make it, we could buy it, or we could do nothing. In terms of programming, developing a solution ourselves and programming that, there was about zero probability that we would get the headcount and the IT resources to do that while we're in the process of rolling out a new ERP. And although we had a couple of divisions that were utilizing an Excel type of tool, it was primarily a annual snapshot kind of a picture that was one time a year, and it was based really only on the quality and delivery performance of a supplier. It really didn't have real-time capability to monitor the environment, or it didn't have the kind of analytics to incorporate all the items and suppliers that could be a part of your BOM. And so trying to think about migrating that to a level that could support all aspects of what we considered supply risk, and to make that sustainable across thousands of suppliers with tens of thousands of items and 33 divisions, it just didn't seem practical. About middle of 2011, we also heard about a company called Resilinc, and we started to talk to Bindi and her team. We also looked at possibly doing some kind of a hybrid. There were some financial insurance. There were some revenue insurance type companies that were out there. Some consulting firms that had some risk evaluation techniques, but it really didn't have everything that Resilinc had. So we thought, well, maybe we could do something as a hybrid, but that turned out to be a very expensive and still kind of clunky alternative, and the status quo just wasn't an acceptable alternative. So we picked Resilinc. So why did we pick Resilinc? Well, first of all, Resilinc had pioneered a methodology and an integrated approach considering lots of different factors pertaining to supply chain risk. And they had a technology that was SAS-based, and which was established with a few customers. They were working on deploying that, and so it wasn't vaporware. It was something that companies were actually using. One of the things that I liked about the solution that Resilinc brought was that they had an end-to-end closed-loop solution, where you start out mapping the supply chain with your BOM, identifying where the weak links are related to the supply base, analyzing and mitigating the where those highest risk issues are, monitoring events that normally we don't have visibility to, and we couldn't hope to deploy resources to skim the world doing that, and then applying the ability to put in place a continuous improvement, a way to continue to, as we reduce the risk with the supply base, how is that improving our position and improving our ability to respond to events if and when they happen. And the other thing is that with Resilinc, we didn't have to experience Excel chaos. We just couldn't imagine trying to integrate all these different spreadsheets and using SharePoint and then being able to have it sustainable. The other thing that I liked about it was that Resilinc brought a scalable and customizable solution for DENTSPLY. Basically, we were able to pick an approach in terms of our plan to ramp up our suppliers, the number of people that we wanted to bring on to work with the tool and manage us within the divisions, and if we wanted to expand, either to accelerate our ramp-up plan with the supply base, or if we wanted to add more users or add more suppliers over time, it was very easy to work with the Resilinc to add that capability or capacity. It was an out-of-the-box easy fit. Basically, our divisions are very busy. The resources in them are very focused on, the day-to-day task and bringing products to market. And so we didn't want to have something that was going to be difficult and complex to try to learn and to operate, and that people would easily forget how to use it once the first time they logged off from using it. So it was really out of the box, and we didn't, because it's an SaaS solution. We didn't have to worry about getting our IT resources devoted to developing extracts or making it compatible with our system. And finally, our partner Resilinc here is, I think Bindya's team and my experience from working with the Resilinc organization for the last year and a half is I felt that they brought an internal competence that I have never seen. At least with some of the folks I've worked with during my career. So I thought Resilinc was on the leading edge, and that's why we went with them. John? Okay, so some of our findings. First of all, we're very early on in the journey of ramping up our supply base and our divisions on Resilinc. Basically, we're kind of taking a business group rollout approach. We're very on in the early phases of ramping up the supply base related to our endodontics business, and this year we'll also add our healthcare business and our implants business. So we're going from 30 to 200 suppliers probably over the next 12 to 16 months. As our first step, we wanted to do a proof of concept. And we wanted to do this proof of concept because, first of all, we wanted to be able to show the divisions that it really did what we said and what Resilinc said it would do. And our senior management was extremely supportive of this, but we wanted to make sure that it would run the way that we thought it would. And as we got into the proof of concept and onboarding the suppliers, 98% of the suppliers participated literally without any pressure. There were a few that we had to call and kind of bother them a little bit to get the information turned in, but it wasn't a matter of resistance. And basically how it worked is that we engaged the suppliers, we educated them that Resilinc would be contacting them, informed them why they were doing this, but Resilinc did all of the heavy lifting with the data. And so we worked with the Resilinc to provide them the structure of the information, the bill of materials, the supply base, the contacts, but they really did the heavy lifting. And so that resulted in very low impact to our divisions. And what we learned was that most of the suppliers really want to improve, and they saw this as an opportunity to strengthen their relationship with us as their customer. The other thing was after we a few months after doing the proof of concept, we sat down with the Resilinc team and we went through the findings. And what we found was that the recovery time, I would say are the hot spots, we had a number of items and suppliers that where the recovery times were much larger than we expected. We thought, the worst case, we had some suppliers that were in the 14 to 26 week range. But we found some that were even in, I think, 40-week range. And so this was definitely some insight. And we had some multi-tier suppliers that we had no idea that we could drill down into the fourth level of transparency. And when we saw that, you could really easily see the connection that even though your tier one supplier might not be in a risky zone, their sub-tier suppliers definitely are. And so that allows us to engage our partners in the raw material to have them work and strengthen their supply chain, which they are actually very grateful to be afforded that visibility. Some of the suppliers that we considered low risk are actually high risk. For example, we have labels, and due to FDA requirements related to the kind of labeling that we have, where it's produced, the kind of material that it's made out of, the adhesion properties of the label, and how that label goes to a simple thing like a folding carton, that becomes a very critical situation, and you cannot just switch a label supplier from one to the other very quickly if you had a crisis. The other thing that was good is that when you identify the risk levels, it really helps drive discussions in a quantitative way with R&D organizations, with management, with suppliers. It helps you make decisions about where to prioritize precious critical resources in order to systematically lower your overall risk to your revenue and the supply chain. And the transparency of the sub-tier relationships drives the plan with the tier ones. And so this helps engage them in a way that we never used to be able to. Next one, John. So basically, in terms of lessons learned, our executive team was very supportive of this from the very beginning. We set the context with them just simply, you simply need to have one slide saying, remember these situations, what it did to us. And we found that the senior management was very supportive to invest in the proof of concept. Our COO said, we have to do this. And they were very supportive in providing the sponsorship in order to make the investment to start a proof of concept with Resilinc and try a pilot. And what we found is that doing a pilot run was very critical to building the buy-in, because our divisions, while they knew that we needed a solution and agreed that they needed to support something, for them to say, yes, this is what we want to invest in, to trust in, basically trust their business in, for them to be able to touch and feel what this really does and how it works and how it affects their organizations was very critical. It gave them the trust that, these are our suppliers, these are not Resilinc suppliers on this prototype tool, and this makes sense. And it really accelerated the adoption, not only with the first wave of the divisions, but all the divisions that would follow. I think it's practical that you have to engage suppliers up front as partners in this and explain the goals, but we found that they were very willing and open to consider this, because after you have the discussion with them, you find out that they're really having the same problem. And then finally, you've got to plan and integrate this into our supplier development process. We have a basic supplier development scorecard focused around quality, cost, delivery, innovation, and risk. And we're using the Resilinc tool to measure that risk score and then drive quantifying the improvement in it. So I hope that was beneficial for you, and I'll turn it over back to the host.
Thanks, Craig. Kevin.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Craig, for that for your presentation. It's very informative, and it's interesting to hear DENTSPLY's journey into building resilient supply chains. I lead, as John mentioned on the front end of the call, I lead KPMG supply chain and operations advisory practice here in the States, and it's clear that while we do a lot of work for clients across the supply chain, the issue of building resilient supply chains and addressing supply chain risk is becoming increasingly important and increasingly top of mind, not only to supply chain executives, but as John mentioned, to the boards. Increasingly CEOs and CFOs are concerned about the risks they face and the potential impact that supply chain disruptions might have on image, revenue, profitability, compliance, and so forth. So it's clear that this topic is not only topical, but it's increasingly important. You can go to the next slide, John. So as we think about, as KPMG thinks about supply chain risk, many of the factors that Craig just mentioned around supply base, the extended supply base, the geopolitical risks that supply base poses, or that your own operations pose, is one of the critical and important dimensions of risk, among many others. And so when we talk with clients and when we look at issues of supply chain risk, we're really talking about a whole host of factors across the supply chain that have the potential to disrupt the supply chain. So it could be regarding geopolitical risk associated with supplier locations. It can be regulatory compliance that impact the extended supply chain. Conflict minerals, for example, which is posing a regulatory and a risk and a potential image and brand problem with some client companies as they start thinking about how they comply with the new Dodd-Frank regulations. In some cases, the risks are both regulatory, but also address things like counterfeiting and securitization of the supply chain. For example, in the pharmaceutical industry, the California e-pedigree regulations are really aimed at building a resilient supply chain that enables anyone in the healthcare system to ensure that a product is not counterfeit and that it is not a black market product. So the risk issues that clients are facing are broad. There are lots of various dimensions of the issues that they're looking to address, and the solutions that our clients are looking at really span a whole range of different compliance or different risk dimensions. The bottom line here is that the number and importance of the risks are increasing, and it's becoming critically important for every company to be thinking about how they're managing the end-to-end risks that they face. We like to put these in a circle for a reason, because we believe the solution that our clients need to be working toward is really getting a 360-degree view of risk, not only in terms of the supply base, but also the risks imposed by their own operations, the risks imposed by their customers across all of these dimensions. And increasingly, our clients want to integrate the information that they need to manage all these risks into a single dashboard or a single point of view, so they can really get a sense of what the real priorities are and how best to mitigate those. John, if you want to jump in the next. So as one of the themes here in terms of our one of the themes here is certainly that it's important to take an end-to-end or extended enterprise view of risk. That it isn't sufficient to simply look back at Tier 1 supply base. In many cases, it's not the Tier 1, but Tier 2, Tier 3, the extended supply base buried into the supply base where you find the most critical issues. A component that is sourced by a Tier 2 supplier from a Tier 2 supplier that may impact multiple product lines or multiple platforms or multiple brands. So Tier 1 isn't sufficient. You really need to take this and extended enterprise view. Some of the factors that are contributing to this increased importance of risk are identified below. John mentioned some of those in his opening remarks. Things like, increased outsourcing, increased regulatory impacts and influences. The whole focus on lean over the last few years, globalization. All of these factors are contributing to what are really, more brittle and more susceptible supply chains. And so, as these trends have continued, the risk profile of many of our clients has increased. If you look at the automotive industry, for example, 10 or 15 years ago, the number of Tier 1 suppliers was almost double what it is today. And the reason it was almost double was not simply because companies, the OEMs, rationalized the supply base. In fact, what they did was they moved to an assembly operation which demanded that Tier 1 suppliers integrate multiple suppliers into a component that comes onto the assembly line. Well, what that did was it pushed some Tier 1 suppliers into the Tier 2, Tier 3, and as a result, they lost visibility into those suppliers. And by visibility, I mean, what is their financial performance? What is their financial stability? What is their geopolitical risk? What are some of the other factors that might cause disruption in the supply base? And so many of these forces, are different in different industries, but they're all creating a greater need and a greater imperative for companies to be looking at the risk issues that we've been talking about. John, next page. So this is just an abstract, conceptual view of to make a point, the following point, and that is that it's not possible to mitigate all the supply chain risks that you have. If you looked at how much it would cost you to fully mitigate risk, it would be exorbitant, and you just couldn't do it. The reality is that most companies have to strike a mix between being proactive and reactive. And proactive means, looking at the risks, just like Craig mentioned, understanding the sources of flexibility and the tactics that one can take to diversify the supply base or diversify the manufacturing base. So there are certainly some proactive things that can be done, putting in the technology platforms that give you visibility, putting in event monitoring technologies that give you early warning. But that's never going to be sufficient to manage all risks. And so every company also needs to build a workforce that is inclined to act, so that could react in an effective and a productive way. And there are lots of good examples of situations where companies that had a really good reactive capability, in addition to a good proactive capability, were the ones that succeeded when they had problems with their supply chain. So the point of this slide is simply, really that a balanced approach, reactive and proactive capabilities are essential to building what are resilient supply chains. Next slide, John. We have a sort of maturity model framework that we use when we look at a client across multiple dimensions, and this is a very high-level view of how we look at how prepared, how mature is a company's approach to supply chain resilience. And in the level one, I think as Craig mentioned, the first stage at DENTSPLY was they were really a reactive company, and that's really sort of a level one response. I mean, that's sort of the basic capability that many clients have, and that's often the only capability that many clients have. I've been into clients where we step into a war room. I think Craig mentioned the war room that he stepped into early in his career at DENTSPLY. You step into these war rooms where all the problems with every supplier, in the Tier 1, Tier 2, 3 supplier listed, and they're trying to remediate all those problems. That's indicative and emblematic of a Tier 1 reactive capability. But as companies build the additional insight, build in tools, adopt things like tools like Resilinc, get the visibility that they need across their organization, get into the Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 suppliers, as they begin to build out that 360-degree view of supply chain risk across all the risk factors that I mentioned earlier, they really move up the maturity curve. And I would say that I have not seen probably any company today that is at the level 5 in our maturity model, but there are certainly companies that are emerging at the level 3 and level 4 arena, which have really done an exceptional job at really understanding not only their internal risks, but really branching out into the extended supply chain and getting a deeper and more complete view of risk across the entire risk wheel. So there are really two dimensions to how you move up the maturity model. One is how complete a view of risk do you have across the risk wheel that we proposed, and then two, how is that extended across the supply chain? And if you look across both of those dimensions, you can plot on various dimensions of people, process, technology, and so forth. You can really plot where you might stand. And clearly, many of our clients are making the investments they need to move up the maturity level as they get more experience and more capabilities to manage many of those risk factors. John? So so in terms of how we work with Resilinc is, Resilinc is a tool that we leverage in our end-to-end risk approach. Our risk approach follows 4 phases. First, we look at how do we assess we assess the supply chain risk environment, looking at each of the risk factors in the risk wheel, and we use various tools and analyses, including Resilinc, to help us understand what are the risk factors that are most important and most impactful, and how do we prioritize and build in our second phase the courses of action required to mitigate those. And the courses of action can really take many different forms. In some cases, it's implementing tools and technologies that give visibility. Implementing Resilinc as an ongoing event monitoring tool, that's a course of action. Other courses of action are related to people. How do you train your operations team to be effective in a reactive mode, and how do you train them to utilize tools that they have available to them in a proactive mode, so that they can, in an ongoing way, improve the risk profile of the business. Sometimes the courses of action are structural, diversifying the manufacturing footprint so that you're not manufacturing in a single source location or in a location that is geographically susceptible to disruptions. In some cases, it's diversifying the supply base, moving to dual sources or geographically diverse sources of supply. Sometimes the solution is the courses of action are around process. I think Craig mentioned one of the ones that were important to DENTSPLY is how do you build a sense of the risk profiles of supply base into the new product development process? How do you build controls around the ability to qualify a new supply? You may want to have a control around the ability to qualify a new supplier if they're located in a location that is susceptible to disruptions, or or a supply that has historically had problems with disruption, or historically had problems with performance. So there are controls types of capabilities that are also important to take into account. So structural, people, technology, and process, all of those levers need to be considered as you think about a set of strategies, the courses of action that need to be taken to mitigate risk. So the bottom line here is that risk, clearly the risk factors are increasing. Regulatory compliance, regulatory issues are increasing risk profiles. These other forces at work have made supply chains more brittle. It's important for every company to be thinking about what are the right courses of action and activities they need to undertake to lower that risk profile and assure their boards and their investors that they have a plan that will protect profits, protect image, and protect revenues. John?
Thank you, Kevin. Bindia?
Great. Thank you, Kevin and Craig. Thank you. And also thank you all for your time today. So I'll jump right into it, John. Next slide. So, when we've talked about this quite a lot, and when we think about supply chain risk, we often think about the problem in terms of big earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, etc. And then we often worry, that these are big, unpredictable events. So, how can we be proactive about them, or how can we be in control when we don't know when they'll happen, where they'll happen, and how they'll play out? So, the reality is that our supply chain is constantly in disruption mode. I mean, we're always going through allocations or chasing parts and working on critical supply shortages, etc. And many of these have nothing to do with large catastrophic events. So what I'd like to do now is shift the thinking a little bit and describe this problem in terms of supply chain resiliency, which we believe really is a function of, things like who we buy from, what we buy from them, what type of contracts we sign, how much inventory we hold on different parts. If we have multiple sources qualified, how much split do we do on different sources? And, these are decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis at different levels throughout our company. So these are very much decisions that are within our control, and collectively these decisions determine how well we protect continuity of supply for our parts. And it also affects our ability to achieve operational excellence on a consistent or a sustained basis. So therefore, what I'm trying to say is simply by shifting how we look at the problem, instead of thinking about it as a risk problem, if we look at the resiliency issue and what are the things we can control, we have addressed the critical issue of whether we can really get ahead of this or not, or retain some amount of control and predictability in our fate at the end of the day. Next slide, John. So, the business environment we're in today is complex. We've gone into this quite a lot. If you're a typical high-tech auto, medical devices, industrial devices, equipment type of a company, you have a supply chain that's around the world, multiple tiers deep. And in this environment, the problem is that our tools are still largely within the four walls, and they have not kept pace with the complexity. If we adopt SaaS technology, we are connecting with our tier one suppliers only, whereas our supply chain is definitely multiple tiers deep. So because of this, we have become more and more manual in the sourcing and procurement function, and we're managing our business with people and with tools that are very traditional and which require a lot of manual effort in order to get to any kind of actionable insights. And our people just don't have the time to put into collecting and combining streams of information from various different places and getting to something that they can actually go do something with. So, next slide, Jen. So, your journey to total resiliency requires a longer-term commitment. You're not going to solve this overnight. It's definitely a journey. On the maturity curve that Kevin talked about, you're not only investing in solutions and analytics and visibility tools, but also over time incorporating these analytics and insights into your business practices so that your organization functions harmoniously throughout this journey. And therefore, your incentives have to be aligned so that when you work on resiliency, it doesn't clash with other initiatives and priorities throughout the business. And this type of change, it doesn't happen overnight. So that's why this is definitely something you accomplish with buy-in from the highest levels, which is what Craig said was the very first thing that they went out and did. Executive alignment and buy-in is very critical before you start. So I'm going to talk about how do we then lay out the case for this change to our business. Next slide. So, when we are in a disruption situation, typically we're caught off guard more often than not, and we end up incurring substantial costs and impact. What I'm showing you here are the sizes and types of the various costs that we end up incurring, and our resource utilization, initially when something happens, we are using resources to manage this. Larger disruptions happen less frequently, have higher magnitude, but we are constantly experiencing allocation situation or manufacturing lines down situations, actually, which are pretty impactful. Anytime you pay premiums or expedite freight, your profit reduces. Anytime lines are down, you're paying for your lease, utilities, cash is tied up in assets and people, all of which are non-productive. So this cash burn has a major profit impact. And then lastly, if you can't secure supply in time or run out of inventory, you might have huge revenue impact, or you might lose market share and lose customers. And this type of long-term impact is actually affects the company's valuation, your stock price, and actually it affects all of us in turn, because when the company doesn't do well, guess what? Our bonuses, our raises get impacted as well. So, these disruptions do have a major impact, and this scenario doesn't always happen with large earthquake, hurricane types of events, but also, supplier factory fires, which I'll show you in the last slide, happen on a day-to-day basis around the world, and typically these can happen anytime, anywhere. They're not dependent on a large earthquake or natural disaster. And the worst thing is that we are completely dependent on suppliers to report when factory fires happen. And sometimes they may not even know that their supplier had a factory fire. So the problem is that several weeks after an event, you might get notified, and next thing you know, you're in an allocation situation, fighting for limited supply and capacity. So, next slide. So during a disruption, this is how this plays out. If you don't have a robust 24/7 event monitoring and sensing capabilities, it's going to take you days or worse, weeks before you find out something has happened. So you're acting on the assumption that business is as usual when something has happened that you're going to find out several days or weeks later. And by the time supplier notifies you, they've also notified others. Now you begin the work of identifying which parts, how much do you need to protect yourself, and that assessment can be sometimes days long, and now your resources are diverted from their other activities. So there's the opportunity cost that you're incurring. By the time you now go into the marketplace and secure inventory or capacity, other companies have jumped into the fray. Everyone's vying for that. So now you're paying premiums and freight. You run out of supply, you go lines down, cash burn. And then lastly, long-term impact. This is one of the reasons why we believe that supply chain finance is actually a very critical partner to you, because they really keep track of, the real and the hidden costs of disruptions, which we within the supply chain organizations were not constantly privy to. So we may sometimes believe, oh, we got lucky, and I hear this all the time. We got lucky, we just paid a little bit of premium. But the overall business impact of paying premiums and freight expedites can actually be massive, and those types of profit leakages over time can have a major business impact. So, and long-lasting. So let's talk about, John, what a proactive approach looks like, right? So, what are the critical elements of a robust capability? So we have taken the plan, monitor, protect approach. Within plan, we recommend that we address the foundational capability, which is mapping, collecting information about your supply chain. And I'm not talking just about your tier one, but who are your suppliers' suppliers? Where are your suppliers located globally? Where are their suppliers located globally? Where do your parts come from? What backup facilities are available for response and recovery? It is also, important to identify, where these, and these should be factories, not just headquarter addresses. So the very important point I want to stress is when you query suppliers, it shouldn't just be an address, but actually a factory address that you should be getting from them. The next step is quantifying those areas of the supply chain that have the highest impact or highest risk scores. We prefer to think about this in terms of impact analytics instead of just managing based on spend. After all, if you don't have a button or a connector, you can't ship your phone, right? So that's not done. So therefore, even low spend, single source, custom, semi-custom parts can have a big impact if you're not going to be able to replace them quickly. So Craig talked about the recovery time or the time to qualify alternate sources. Those are some very important considerations in determining how exposed you are within your supply chain. Slicing your supply chain by impact will bring these types of high exposure parts, sites, or suppliers to the forefront. So you don't end up taking too much inventory out on those parts, for example, if you're working on inventory reduction type of initiatives. The other part of analyzing risk is really risk scores, and this goes back to the business case for proactive mitigation. These concepts can really help you shine the spotlight on your critical exposures, and you can take the top 5 suppliers by impact or the top 50 parts by impact, and then, as Kevin mentioned, there's a balance between being proactive and reactive. And I'll build on this further and say there are really 4 things you do. It's risk acceptance, risk transfer, which is insurance, proactive mitigation, and reactive crisis management. The reality is that neither of these in isolation is good enough. So you really have to find the right balance between these 4 strategies, and we believe very firmly that our approach really helps you do that effectively. As we map the supply chain, the next step is monitoring the global events, so you constantly have your finger on the pulse of things happening throughout the world and how those impact you. Now, whether you do this yourself or you use a solution provider like Resilinc, make sure you track not only the standard catastrophic things, but also things like labor strikes, transportation strikes, factory fires, regulatory risk, recalls, FDA injunctions or actions, etc. And then lastly, proactive mitigation is key. So effective mitigation strategies can be selected using these insights. So a proper mapping capability can really help you, John, next slide, help you understand the global hotspots where most of your supplier factories are aggregated. So I'll skip through this and one more slide. I want to go to the multi-tier mapping slide. Next slide, John. And this really shows you that which sub-tier suppliers are your risk aggregation points. So here this slide is showing you in a typical high-tech situation, your foundry subcontractors or assembly test subcontractors might be used by multiple fabless tier 1 companies. So risk aggregation at the sub-tier level is a very critical capability that can really help you prioritize and understand your supply chain dependencies well. Next slide. So ultimately, and at the end of the day, this slide really brings out, what happens if you have your finger on the pulse, if you have done your mapping proactively, you're alerted as and when an event happens, and then you quickly bring together your team in a virtual war room that has all your mapping information connected to your products and inventory, etc. The availability of actionable information is right there in the hands of your response team. You're faster to book available capacity and grab inventory. You spend less on premiums and freight expedites, and you improve your chances of keeping your lines running. And therefore, you improve your chances of fulfilling revenue and demand and hopefully prevent the long-term impact of disruptions altogether. John, back to you.
Thanks, Bindi, and thanks, Craig, and thanks, Kevin, and really appreciate everyone's attendance today. I know we're at the end of our hour time, and I guess we'll if you have any questions specifically, I did get some. If you have some questions, feel free to send those to me, and I can follow up with you directly at john.bovet, it's jon.bovet@resilinc.com. And just so you know, for those attending today, we will be showing a solution demonstration on April 3rd at noon Eastern as a follow-up to this webcast. Typically, people like to see a demonstration if there's interest. So we will be doing that on April 3rd. We will follow up with you with an email invitation to that. And again, I wanted to thank my panelists today for taking the time. I know Craig is on a trip to Germany, so really appreciate that. And thank you again, everyone.